Hi, I'm Alicia Butler-Pierre. Thank you for visiting my YouTube channel. The episode that you're about to listen to is a pre-recording of my podcast, The Business Infrastructure Curing Back Office Blues Show. If you hear some topics that are of interest to you, you can learn more about them by reading my book, Behind the Facade, and I'll tell you more about that after the end of this episode.
Hello, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Business Infrastructure Curing Back Office Blues show. I'm your hostess, Alicia Butler-Pierre, and you might be thinking, oh no, not another business podcast. What could she possibly talk about that I haven't heard already? Well, I promise you that I'm going to make this worth your while. You see, this is a podcast that's all about taking action. Action specifically to save your business from the chaos of fast growth. And while saving your business from chaos of fast growth, I'm going to talk to you about how to create jobs in the process. So this is a show that's for those of you who own small businesses that are past the startup phase, and you may be in need of business infrastructure because your company is growing so fast. Now let me start first by explaining exactly what business infrastructure is. Now get your paper and pen ready if you are sitting down somewhere, but if you're driving, don't worry about it, just listen to it and you can always replay. Business infrastructure is a system that links a company's organizational goals with the people, processes, and tools that are necessary to support those goals in a profitable, scalable, and sustainable manner. Whew. That was a mouthful, wasn't it? Well, here's the long and short of it. At the end of the day, business infrastructure, it's not rocket science, I promise you. It's literally about you defining the work that needs to be done, defining who should do that work, and then lastly, defining how that work should be done. The beauty or the novelty in all of this is actually linking everything together. So business infrastructure probably encompasses things that you're already doing in your business, but you may not be linking it to all of the other operational things that may be going on in your company. It's all about scale and growth. Now, when we hear those terms, and they're kind of starting to become very cliche, and I do realize that, most of us, when we hear people talking about how they can help you scale your business or help you grow your business, they're really coming at you from a marketing angle. And it makes sense, right? When you're first starting your company, you need to get the word out about your product or service. So it's all about branding and promotions and sales and PR and publicity and social media networking or social media marketing, networking one-on-one with people. Now, that's what helps drive the business to you. But what we're going to be focusing on for this podcast is about scaling and growth from an operational perspective. So it's not about marketing for growth, it's about operations to manage the growth. So what happens when all of those dollars that you've invested in your marketing, you're starting to realize a return on that investment, and now you have more business than you can handle? Well, in order to sustain that business that's coming in, you need to have solid operations. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is via business infrastructure. Now, here's the thing. When your operations are disorganized, dysfunctional, and overall in disarray, trust me, your clients will find out. And they are never quiet. An angry client is almost always going to be louder than a satisfied client. Now, you might be wondering, well, who are you? And specifically, what qualifies you to talk to me about business infrastructure? Well, for starters, my company originated the term business infrastructure, but let me share with you the story of how that all came to be. My career started 21 years ago as a chemical engineer in New Orleans, Louisiana. Now, for chemical engineers, we traditionally have two career tracks. We can either work as a process engineer, where we would primarily be working in chemical plants or oil refineries, or the other traditional career track was to work as a design engineer. I was fortunate to actually have worked in both tracks. Now, as a process engineer, I worked for some really large companies, and I was responsible for making sure that whatever product we were producing, that it always met a certain specification. And if for whatever reason product did not meet that certain specification, as a process engineer, I had to literally go and figure out what went wrong in the process of making it that caused it to be off spec. Let me give you an example that hopefully you can relate to. Imagine making lemonade, okay, but you're doing this instead of just making a pitcher or a gallon of lemonade, you're making thousands of gallons of lemonade per hour. There's certain ingredients that you have to use in order to make that lemonade. And let's say you happen to make a particular batch that doesn't have either the sweetness, the color, the texture, or overall the consistency that it's supposed to have. As a process engineer, you would have to then figure out, well, what went wrong? Was there something wrong in one of the raw ingredients that I used to make this lemonade? Was there a malfunctioning in any of the equipment that I used to make the lemonade? Was the timing off? Did I follow the correct steps? In a nutshell, that's the type of work that I did in these chemical plants. Now, when I worked as a design engineer, I was primarily working with oil refineries, and I was literally designing pieces of equipment that allowed the process of refining oil to be that much more efficient. During my time as an engineer, especially when I was working with these really large corporations, I made two really critical observations. The first one, I actually witnessed in my I worked as a chemical engineer I think it was like 7 or 8 years. I witnessed 4 major downsizes where thousands of people lost their jobs. And these were people who were senior. They had seniority in these companies, meaning they had been with these companies, many of them longer than I had been alive at that point in my career. 20 to 30 years gone. And they were lucky if they got a watch, some cake, ice cream, and a pat on the back. Thank you for your years of service. The second really critical observation that I made was I realized I didn't understand business. When I had my very first job out of college, every month we would have to meet with accountants. And these accountants would tell us what our production schedules had to be for the following month. And they would use terms that, honestly, they may as well have been speaking Swahili to me because I just didn't understand. They were saying things about assets and liabilities and equity and revenue, expenses, top-line growth, bottom-line profitability. I didn't understand it. I was an engineer. I didn't have a lot of exposure at that point to business. Now, I made up right then and there that I did not want the outcome of those two critical observations to be my fate. I didn't want to dedicate the next 20 to 30 years of my life to a company only to have them pull the rug from underneath me. And I also realized I needed to educate myself more about business. So I left corporate America behind and actually started working at a smaller family-owned engineering consulting firm. And it was awesome. They were growing fast. And that's how I got my first exposure to what it was like to be in a fast-growing small business. I already knew what it was like to be in a large corporate enterprise, but now I was in a small company. I also decided to go back to business school part-time. So I was working full-time during the day, going to business school at night, and I realized I needed to shift my focus from what I didn't want, which was, again, I didn't want to commit to a company for years and years of my life, again, only to have the rug pulled from underneath me. But I shifted from what I did not want to what I did want. And I knew that I wanted to own my own business. I didn't know what kind of business. I just knew that I wanted to have my own company. And that opportunity came sooner than I expected, rather unexpectedly. And really, it started with a close encounter to really what was kind of like a near-death experience. I was living in New Orleans. It was, I think, either late August or early September of 2004. There was a tropical storm moving through the area. New Orleans, because it's below sea level, it floods very easily. And I was stuck in my house. And most people don't realize this, but many of the homes in New Orleans are already raised several feet off the ground. The water rose to about 4 feet. And I remember thinking to myself, I've got to get out. Get out. Now, this was long before the movie of the same name came about, but literally that was all I could think of. Once the water started to recede, all I had on my mind was getting out. So I quit my job. Everybody thought I was crazy. Sold my house. And the following year, February 2005, I moved to Atlanta, Georgia. I believe 28 or 29 at the time. And I never looked back. Now, as fate would have it, I actually came here looking for a job. I had just finished up my MBA. So I'm thinking, wow, I'm going to come to Atlanta. They have all of these Fortune 500 companies here. I'm going to get a job, preferably doing something where I can still leverage my engineering skills, but also what I've learned through business school. And it didn't happen. But here's what did happen. Everything that I seemed to read, everything that I seemed to watch on TV or in a movie or in a documentary, everything that I seemed to hear, all spoke to the message of we're all born with natural skills, talents, and abilities. Now, of everything that I've read, that I had seen, and that I had heard, there was one thing that stood out for me more than anything else, and that was a book called The Miseducation of the Negro, written by Carter G. Woodson in 1933. And I swear to you, if you read this book, it's as though he wrote it yesterday. Now, I recommend this book for anyone, regardless of your ethnicity, because of its universal message. And I'd like to take some time to read you a quote from the book. When you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his action. You do not have to tell him to stand here or go yonder. He will find his quote-unquote proper place and will stay in it. You do not need to send him to the back door. he will go without being told. In fact, if there is no back door, he will cut one for his special benefit. His education makes it necessary. History shows that it does not matter who is in power. Those who have not learned to do for themselves and have to depend solely on others never obtain any more rights or privileges in the end than they did in the beginning. Now here's what I got from reading the book, my interpretation, that we are institutionalized to become employees and not entrepreneurs. Here I was with all this education, and I still didn't know how to capitalize on my own natural skills, talents, and abilities. I had been institutionalized, whether intentionally or not, to become an employee and not an entrepreneur. So I was forced to go through some self-reflection. Well, what are my natural skills, talents, and abilities? And I realized my natural skill is organizing. It had served me well throughout school, throughout the jobs that I had had up to that point. And it wasn't that I was the brightest star in the sky or the sharpest knife in the drawer. I was just always really organized. And it helped me get things done. So I decided to start my own business, called it Equilibria, and it actually began as a professional organizing company. And here's what's funny. Within my first year of business, I was invited to speak on a local TV show. And it gave me exposure to the fact that there were businesses who were actually disorganized. I had no idea. Up to that point, I was an engineer. Everywhere I worked, and engineers tend to be so process-oriented and so tactically driven that, honestly, I didn't see chaos from an operations standpoint. So I was very naive about businesses and the fact that they can be very disorganized. Up to that point, I just thought it was people being disorganized in their homes. Now, after working with a marketing firm, they said, you know, Alicia, you really need to shift the language of how you describe your business, because this is more than just organizing. If you're going to actually start doing this type of work for companies, for small businesses, you need to shift your language from organizing to business infrastructure. And that's how it all came about, folks. A couple of years after that, I formalized the work that I would do for my clients in the form of a methodology, put my engineering hat back on, started to really focus on creating processes for these fast-growing small businesses so that they could expand in a predictable and repeatable and sustainable way. And 13 years later, I am proud to tell you that I am still in business. Has it been easy? Absolutely not. But I would not trade it for the world. Now, through specific projects, lectures, online content that I've put out there over the years, I've literally given thousands of entrepreneurs around the world access to tools that are otherwise reserved for larger publicly traded companies. I'm fortunate in that I have worked in and been exposed to companies in over 30 industries at every stage, every size. And here's what I know for sure. Business infrastructure is critical if you are serious about taking a mom-and-pop type operation and growing it into a sustainable enterprise that can function without your daily presence. But here's the challenge. So many of us really want that. We want to expand our businesses. We may have more business right now than we can handle. But we don't know how to really scale. Because again, most of the people who are out there talking about helping you scale your businesses are approaching it from a marketing perspective and not an operational perspective. So the whole thing seems to elude us in many ways. Well, you're in luck, my friend, because that is what this podcast, this show is all about. The how. How, from an operations perspective, can I actually scale my business? So now that you know my story and how I came to define business infrastructure, you might be wondering, well, why is it even needed? My business is small. Why do I need that at this stage? Well, stay tuned for next week's episode when I answer that very question. And not only will I answer that question, but I'm going to give you some very specific examples that you'll be able to relate to that will prove beyond the shadow of a doubt why the time is now for you to start implementing this in your company. In the meantime, please don't keep this information to yourself. If there is something that you've learned or there's some nugget of information that you feel that other people might be able to benefit from, please share it with them. Comment, connect with me, give me a 5-star rating. It would be much appreciated. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Just look me up. My name is Alicia Butler Pierre. And be sure to mention this podcast. And you can also direct message me a question, and if I'm able to answer that question on a future episode, I'll be sure to give you as well as your business a shout out. So until the next time, folks, I will speak with you again. Keep your businesses going and thriving, and I'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed what you heard. If so, be sure to like the video and be sure to subscribe so that you'll be the first to know when our next episode airs. And remember, if there are topics that you want to learn more about, you can do that by reading my book, Behind the Facade. I'll see you next time.